Hey, so welcome everyone. We have a really large crowd today, which I'm so excited about. I'm Julie Zuckerman, author of the Book of Jeremiah. I forgot to bring my book to hold up for a second. Welcome to the May Literary Modiin author event. And a lot of you are new to the author series, so I have a couple words of introduction before we get started. For those of you who aren't familiar, Modiin is a planned city in Israel, halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So come visit next time you're here. We have a large population of English speakers here in Modiin. So in June 2019, I started Literary Modiin as a way to bring local Israel-based authors to the large community of English readers that we have here. We held a few in-person events, and then when the pandemic hit, we switched to virtual, which allows us to hear from authors and welcome attendees from all over. Today's event is our 36th. So double high, which is exciting. The format of today's event is that each author will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we open it up to questions. Everybody's on mute because we have a very large attendance. So you can put your questions in the chat box. And if you have any technical difficulties, just send a private note in the chat to me. Send it to me, not to my iPad. That's just a backup in case we have any technical glitches. And if you are in Literary Modiin, feel free to start a watch party. Actually, I don't even know if we still have those things on Facebook, but used to be. So that's a leftover line. Anyway, now I'd like to introduce Aaron Hamburger, our first author to speak. Aaron is the author of a story collection titled The View from Stalin's Head, which was awarded the Rome Prize by the American Academy of Arts and Letters and nominated for a Violet Quill Award. He's also written 3 novels, Faith for Beginners, nominated for a Lambda Literary Award, Nirvana is Here, winner of a bronze medal from the 2019 Forward Reviews Indie Books Award, and Hotel Cuba, which he'll be speaking about today. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Tin House, Michigan Quarterly Review, and many others. He has also won numerous fellowships from Yaddo Derjasi, and others, and he's taught creative writing at Columbia, George G.W. University, NYU, and Stone Coast MFA program. So Aaron, I'm going to spotlight you and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Thanks so much for having me, and very excited to hear from both Judy and John in a bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my novel, Hotel Cuba. And it starts with a picture. So 6 years ago, I found this incredible picture of my grandmother from 1922 wearing full male drag. Now, as a kid growing up in Detroit's Jewish suburbs, I knew my grandmother as a sweet, frail bubby in tweed skirts who'd rock me in her lap, singing lullabies in a thick Yiddish accent. So when I saw this photo, I needed to solve a mystery. Who was this woman? And that's when I dove into her story, which became my novel, Hotel Cuba. So I want you to imagine a young daughter of a cantor, one of 11 children, from a shtetl that in a few short years gets hit by war, pogroms, famine, the Russian Revolution. She has to get away. But in 1921, America is closing its doors to Jewish immigrants like her. So instead, she goes to, of all places, the sultry, hedonistic world of Havana, Cuba. And oh, by the way, this is during Prohibition, when Americans are flocking to the island to get drunk and get wild. Think Mardi Gras spring break on steroids. So picture this woman crossing an ocean, then stepping off the boat, wearing her best heavy woolen European clothing in the intense 100-degree heat. She's left behind everyone, everything she knows. She doesn't know the language. She doesn't know a soul. My grandmother was a skilled seamstress, and so she found work making hats for a middle-aged Jewish couple. After 6 months, she paid 2 Americans every cent she had to pretend that she was their daughter, and they were going to smuggle her to Key West. But immediately when she landed, a man in a uniform pointed to her and said, "Halt!" She was arrested, and after 2 weeks, deported back to Cuba without a penny to her name. So that is the real life framework that inspired the novel Hotel Cuba. I'm going to read to you from a little bit of it so you get the flavor of it. And then I'll just tell you, just a couple of minutes after that, some of the little tidbits that helped me to write this book. And right from the beginning, so nothing you need to know. Fish and oranges. A salty sea of soup dotted with islands of potato chunks that Pearl can mash flat with the back of a spoon. Bread so dry, when she dunks it into her lukewarm soup, the stubborn roll remains firm. But Pearl can be stubborn too. She continues dunking the roll until it softens and melts into a paste. It's depressing, the food on this boat they call SS Hudson. Heavy on salt, light on pepper, parsley, or any herb to give it character, like the shaggy dill in her yard back in Russia, or what used to be Russia, because this year, 1922, their town belongs to Poland. After a good rain, those dill stalks grow so high they collapse under their own weight. Starving, blue-eyed soldiers from the Tsar's army used to pull them out by the roots, mistaking them for carrots, then fling them to the ground. Eat, says Pearl, offering an orange to her younger sister, Frida, sitting with her eyes closed and squeezing her temples. Or save it for later. Don't bother, says Frida. I won't eat it then either. You can't starve all the way to Cuba. Maybe Pearl sounds more like a nagging mother than a sister, but she quit worrying about her own vanity years ago when Mama died after giving birth to Frida. Though Pearl was only 9 then, people already called her old lady, housewife, empress of the kitchen, Madam Singer sewing machine. What will they call her in Havana, where no one knows her and she has no history? She might be anything. It's a thrilling, terrifying thought. Before the war, a girl from Russia who immigrated to America returned to their town to visit as a rich lady. Some women laughed behind her back, mimicked her proud walk, lifted their hair to imitate her short haircut, and called her new woman as an insult. But Pearl didn't laugh. Maybe someday she too would become a kind of new woman like this shtetl girl who transformed herself into a prosperous American lady who could afford to coolly ignore the others' jokes as if she didn't hear. Now there was freedom. Frida, who's in one of her states, won't eat, no matter what Pearl says. Arguing with her is like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. So Pearl returns to her own soup. Tomorrow she'll eat the next soup, and then the one after that, and the one after that. In this way, always looking forward, never back, she and this creaking boat will slowly cross the Atlantic, leaving Europe behind. When Pearl finishes her bowl, she's still hungry. She has long been cursed with a healthy appetite. Her solid, sturdy figure bulges in the wrong places for a woman who loves dainty clothes, loves looking at them and making them. Before the Great War, when people cared what they looked like, Jews and Gentiles alike paid her to make dresses sewn with fine stitches you need a magnifying glass to see. For each dress she made, Pearl imagined a story, the potential to put on a new outfit and become a new person. But sadly, clothes never fit her as beautifully as they do slender Frida, who even before the boat often forgot to eat. Pearl has never forgotten to eat in her life. During the worst of the Great War and then the Revolution and war with Poland after, her hunger was so raw, it addled her thoughts, gnawed at her stomach lining. On the SS Hudson, many passengers are seasick like Frida. Pearl squeezes sideways between tables, casually skims stray peas and carrot knobs from abandoned bowls of soup, scrounges a section of orange, a scrap of pinkish-brown herring. A willowy lady wearing a dusty pink hat watches her at work, out of pity or disgust. She's a sophisticated city type. Jews are so desperate to leave Europe these days, they'd cross the ocean in a bathtub. So Pearl sees many grand people like her mixed with country folk in steerage. This lady has a long, lovely face, pale with a pointed chin, and shrewd gray-green eyes like a cat. Pearl noticed her when she came into the dining room on the arm of a young man who pulled out a chair for her. She stepped forward and sat, didn't even look behind her, confident the chair would be pushed in again, and it was. Pearl imagines what it would be like to have that kind of confidence, to sit into air and know that a seat would appear below you. And that hat, it fires up her imagination. If Pearl could afford to wear a fancy pink hat like that, she could walk down the street with such a cold, blank stare that no one would dare bother her. She's known plenty of women who aren't strictly beautiful, but in the right hat or dress, they're magnificent. Their clothes teach the world to treat them with dignity. The pink lady notices Pearl staring, gives her an inquisitive look, and Pearl, who feels a puzzling itch to capture this exquisite woman's attention, surprises herself by nervously extending a roll and asking, "Maybe you want half?" In response, the woman averts her eyes. "It's all right," says Pearl, fearing she's committed a blunder, but unable to stop herself. "You can have the whole thing if you want." "I'm afraid I'm not very hungry." Looking as if she smelled something rotten, the woman rises and leaves the table, followed by her male companion. Pearl returns meekly to her seat. So I'll stop the reading there. And just to tell you a little bit about that section and in the book in general, I obviously had to do quite a bit of research to, figure out this story. And for years, my family didn't know the immigration stories of both my grandparents. And then in the 1970s, my brothers actually did recorded interviews on cassette with both of my grandparents about their immigration stories. They both came from the same village, although they didn't know each other that well. In Russia, Poland, the border kept changing. And so we have 7 hours of these interviews, which have since been digitized. And 6.5 is my grandfather's story, and half an hour is my grandmother's story. My grandmother was a woman of few but emphatic words, and she gave us the broad outlines of what happened to her. And then I had to go in and try to fill in the missing pieces. And that was what was really exciting to me about this project, was trying to bring to life a lot of what was sort of missing from the recordings. In the recording, she does mention this picture. She mentions it specifically, but tantalizingly, she does not explain why was she dressed like this. And part of the research that I did about this period was women's fashion. And in the early 1920s, androgyny was a thing, but it was not like this. So if a woman were wearing pants, they would be more flowing legs that would almost look like a dress. So this was a definite choice to adopt this sort of male look of clothing. Also, color palettes were very muted at that time, which I thought was interesting. Pistachio greens, dusty pinks, mustard yellows. So anyway, I had to invent my own story as to why my grandmother was dressed this way. But unfortunately, the real story is lost to history. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. But thanks so much for listening, and I'm excited for our next reader.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. Introduce our next reader. Okay. Judy, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, Judy Labensohn has been writing in English in Israel since 1967, when she came to Jerusalem for a one-year program. She forged her unique writer's voice in personal essay columns for the Jerusalem Post and The Nation. Oh, that I remember The Nation. Over a 20-year period. Poetry, essays, and stories have appeared in the Kenyan Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, Lilith, and others. To support Anglo writers in Israel, she founded the Writing Gym in Jerusalem and the Writing Pad in Moshav Beit Zayit in Tel Aviv. For 6 years, she coordinated the Shandy Rudolph Graduate Program in Creative Writing at Bar-Ilan University. We have a lot of people here from that program. She lives with her partner, David Kurz, in Haifa, where she dances, sings in a jazz quartet, cuts hair, writes songs, and puts Emily Dickinson poems to music. Our Names Do Not Appear, published by Lions Press, is her first book. And Judy, I'll just add, I don't know if you know this or remember this, but when I decided I wanted to try my hand at creative writing, you were the first phone call I made. And and you gave me the name of a writing teacher in Jerusalem. So thank you for that. Go ahead, Judy.
Thank you, Julie. You really do a tremendous service to writers, to Anglo writers in Israel by having these events. These are monthly events, and it really opens the world for us writers who are here. Aaron, your story could describe also my story in a way, because you mentioned that you had to fill in a lot of missing pieces and bring to life what was missing. So that, that's also true for the memoir that I wrote. The name of my book is Our Names Do Not Appear. And I want to tell you, hopefully in about 8 or 10 minutes, how the book emerged. It started in 1982 when my third child, a little boy who was 9 months old, was hospitalized for convulsions. And once he was in the hospital, I saw that he was starting another convulsion, and he was turning blue and then purple. And like any immature mother, I panicked and left the room and called the nurses. And I went to hide in a bathroom stall because I didn't want to be there at that moment. And at that moment, like, I got hit on the head from the past, like the past knocked into me. And I remembered that my own mother had a baby who was a third child, and this baby did die when he was around 2 years old. And this memory was the beginning of this obsession that I had of trying to find out who my baby brother was, and why did he die, and when, and where is he buried. And I only had one memory from this time around the mid-50s. I had no dates, but the one memory was the day that Rabbi Alan S. Green, our Reform rabbi, the family rabbi, came to the house and told me and my older sister that our brother had died. And then I ran into the kitchen crying and cried into my mother's apron until my father stomped into the kitchen and told me to be quiet and not to bother my mother. So I would, what I did while I was raising 3 children in the 80s, I kept writing scenes and rewriting scenes of that day, hoping I'd discover more information. When that didn't happen, I started writing letters. I wrote to Rabbi Green, and he, because it was a family secret, our parents did not speak about it at all. And if I did ask my mother for information, she would ask me how the weather was in Jerusalem, or what I served the kids for dinner that night. Like, it was a taboo subject. So I was looking for this taboo subject. So I got a lot of information. I got a death certificate, and this was in the age of the prehistoric age of what we call snail mail. You may recall that when you wrote a letter from Israel, it would take 2 to 4 weeks to get a reply, if not 2 to 4 months. So during the time when I was waiting for replies, I would write these fantasies of what could have happened to Joey. This was the baby's name, Joey. And I realized after all these fantasies that I wanted this baby alive. I needed him alive. But once I got the death certificate, it was clear that he really did die, and I had all the information. And one would think that, okay, I had the facts and that would be the end of it. But I realized after that I needed an embodied story. It wasn't enough just the facts and the dates. So I wrote the story that I needed, and the main characters were my parents, and my sister and I. We had very almost no parts in this story. And one of the smartest things I did was to write the story from the point of view of my father, who was the chief silencer. And writing that story, which which I call in the book Mount Zion, a chronicle. It's fiction based on fact, but it had an amazing, wonderful effect on me, because I realized that what I thought was my own sorrow was actually a family trauma that affected everyone, and the main responsible adult dealing with it was my father. So in terms of my mental health, it was very good for me to write that story. And then after that, I was sick of this obsession. This was already like in the late 90s. And I wanted to get rid of it. And one of the ways I thought I could get rid of it was to give some of these papers away that I had collected. So this may sound really strange, but for my mother's birthday, she came to Jerusalem when she was celebrating her 75th birthday in 1995. And I gave her Joey's death certificate. Now, when I think of that now, oh my God, what was I doing? But I needed to do that. And then I wrote an essay about this meeting of my mother and myself and my giving her the certificate. And then once I had this essay, and I knew, and there was so much material, I wanted to write a book about this. And one of the versions was, I read a lot of pilgrimage narratives to the Holy Land, and I tried to weave my story, which was more an internal pilgrimage, into the narratives of pilgrims who came to the Holy Land from the 4th century. That didn't work, and finally, around the year, I don't know, 2000, yeah, around the year 2000, I got a structure. The structure came to me, and this was like gold. The first part would be these different genres of letters and fantasies. Part 1, and I call it "Give Sorrow Words," which is a quote from Macbeth. And part 2 would be the story, the chronicle, Mount Zion, a chronicle, the story of Joey's birth, his life, and his death. And in part 3, I would write essays, personal essays, which was sort of my favorite genre, I guess, a genre I grew into, explaining each aspect of my trying to get rid of this obsession and of this delayed grief, and to free myself from it. And this coincided with my mother's descent into Alzheimer's. And at that time, she became a person who was there and not there. And this reminded me of the earlier mother, who was also there and not there. So there was this ambiguous, what's called ambiguous death. And then, of course, I read a lot about grieving. And so I realized, this is a real thing. It's just not it's not just my craziness. It's like, and then now that the book is out, people who have read it, they start telling me all their own stories. I mean, everyone has this, I don't know everyone, but many people have unprocessed grief, and it affects your life. And this is like, for me, it was from when I was 5 years old. It affects your life for decades. I mean, I'm in my late 70s, so and it took me a long time to get this book out, and then it took me a long time to let go of it. And now I'm very glad that I'm here and that you're here and that I can tell you about it. And it's not a taboo, and it's really important to talk about these things, because they don't go away, but they can come across as cancer, or you can lose your voice, or you can have, pains here, pains there. They don't go away. The body remembers everything. So now I'll try to calm down, and I'd like to read you 2 letters to dead teachers. And these letters were part of the writing that happened while I was waiting for documents. So I will read them to you now. To Miss Goretzka, kindergarten teacher, Ludlow School, Shaker Heights, Ohio. Dear Miss Goretzka, my baby brother Joey, born on June 18, 1949, disappeared on January 10, 1951, and died on February 24, 1951. Maybe that was the day during rest period when I wet my cot. The snow was so thick, it looked like all the branches on the elm next to the bay window wore casts. So thick we couldn't see the elms on the tree lawn. Do you remember that day? I was 5 years, 7 months, and 13 days old on the day Joey died. Maybe that's why I didn't play in the wooden playhouse, why I liked rest period best and watching snow fall and bury everything. I didn't want to play mother. I couldn't play sister, never the baby brother. I wish I had told you my secret in 1951. I needed an ear, Miss Goretzka. I also could have used a hand on my shoulder or head. A hug would have been good. I needed a room with a door, shelves stacked with tissues, a quiet person sitting on a comfortable chair, not scared of tears, a person who would have said, "More, Judy, tell me more. This is important." I don't know why I never told you the secret, Miss Goretzka. You could have used it for show and tell, or told the principal and the school nurse. The sky would not have fallen, right? Baby Joey was kicking inside me, but I couldn't open up. Thank you for listening now. Better late than never. Yours since 1951, Judy. To Miss Gelsenleiter, first grade teacher, Ludlow School, Shaker Heights, Ohio. Dear Miss Gelsenleiter, remember after Thanksgiving vacation in 1951, when I told Tim in the cloakroom my mother had a baby boy? We were hanging up our winter jackets. Mine was red, his blue with a fuzzy hood. We both wore plaid scarves around our necks. The hooks were like gold fingers. Of course, you don't remember that morning because you were sitting on the teacher's chair in the reading corner, waiting for all of us to take our places. I wish I had been able to say to Tim, to you, and the whole class, and not in the narrow, dark cloakroom with its golden claws, but in the bright classroom with its towering windows covering the whole wall, so that even on gray days, first grade shone with light. My mother had a baby boy. This one is Jimmy. The first one died. He was Joey. This was important, Miss Gelsenleiter, because at the end of November, we were learning to see Dick, see Jane, see Spot. I wish I had known where my first brother was. He left without saying goodbye. Was he buried inside me? Were my mother's tears buried inside me? How could I see? Who could believe? Dear Miss Gelsenleiter, I wish we had learned words like death and sad. I needed words beyond see Spot run. Life in the book was always glad. At home, even walls cried. But it's not your fault, Miss Gelsenleiter. Thank you for teaching me how to read. You taught me to stand straight like an I, even when I felt like a lowercase c. These two are important lessons, One language is better than none. Yours since 1952, Judy. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, for those beautiful readings and your talk. Okay, I'm sure lots of people have questions for Judy. You can put those in the chat. I am going to introduce our third writer. Jonathan Papernick was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. He is the author of the acclaimed short story collection, The Ascent of Ellie Israel, another collection, There Is No Other, and the novels The Book of Stone and I Am My Beloved. His work has received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly and Library Journal and has been translated into Spanish and Italian. He has taught fiction writing at Emerson College since 2007 and serves as senior writer in residence in the Department of Writing, Literature, and Publishing. He has 2 sons and lives with his wife in Providence, Rhode Island. And today he's going to talk to us about his new book, The Gallery of the Disappeared Men. So let me spotlight you and you can take it away, John.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be sharing an event with Aaron and Judy. Were both wonderful readings. So I only hope I could do as well as you all did. I just want to make a quick correction. I do blame Colin Kaepernick for this, but my name is pronounced Papernick. With the advent of Colin Kaepernick as a cultural figure, I've become Papernick more and more and more. So I'm trying to reclaim my name. So Papernick it is. It's not a made-up name. It's not utter Charles Dickens. That's my actual name. So I think I was destined to be writing books. So I'm really excited to be here. So I'm going to be reading from a new collection of short stories of mine called Gallery of the Disappeared Men. It's my 6th book, and there's 14 stories in it. The title story is the one I'll be reading from today. It's called Displaced Person, and it's about 80 pages long. It's a full novella to start off the collection, and it's told from the perspective of a Holocaust survivor who ends up moving to America and marries a watchmaker and gets involved with a gangster. So the story is told as a first-person story told from a woman's perspective. I know there's a lot of debate about who can tell which stories. When I was sitting alone in my room, wondering what would happen if this happened to this character, that's where Fanny came to life. So, we owe to ourselves to write the best story we can, and the rest of the world can either accept it or not. So I'm going to read just an opening paragraph and then give a little brief talk about the genesis of this story, and then I'm going to do about a 4-page reading to finish off. So here's the opening paragraph of Displaced Person from Gallery of the Disappeared Men. I was born twice, once from my mother's womb in the Galician city of Tarnow, and once in the arms of a handsome watchmaker. Enough has been written about the black years of the war, when everything I knew was turned upside down. My nightmares are no more and no less vivid than anyone else who suffered. So I will only say that I survived the catastrophe and leave it at that. So I love that opening sentence, I was born twice. And I think that's a really kind of nice way to kind of start this novella-length story. The genesis of the story came from a failed novel. I was actually writing a novel meant to be entitled The Sunday Synagogue Softball League, about a men's softball league, synagogues who were dealing with their synagogue about to go under after losing all their money to Bernie Madoff. And one of the main characters was Laszlo, the watchmaker, and he was an old man. He was the coach of the team, but he was always kind of having these loving thoughts about his late wife. So I wrote these interspersing chapters of how he came to know Fanny, and there's 4 or 5 different chapters set in the 1940s. And I don't know, when I pulled them out and put them together as one story, I realized I've got a novella here, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of, this story. So this starts off, Fanny's living in the equivalent of Waltham, Massachusetts in the late 1940s with her husband Laszlo, who's a watchmaker. And she's just been at the synagogue at a bris that didn't go that well. There was a little bit of extra blood there. So let's just leave it at that, and I'll read. The ladies' room was downstairs from the function hall, beside a pair of pay telephones with small stenciled signs asking worshipers to refrain from making phone calls on Shabbos. From an alcove, I heard a pair of voices echoing off the bare walls and the smooth terrazzo floor. I should cut your balls off after what you pulled today. It was an honest mistake. My hand slipped. Well, here's another honest mistake for you to think about. I heard grunts and moans of what sounded like a sack of flour being dropped to the ground. Oops, it looks like my hand slipped too. I didn't mean to. Get up and take your medicine like a man. Mr. Khan, I'm sorry, I apologize. Your baby will be fine. The Moyle had a high-pitched, pleading voice. He won't remember a thing, he stammered out something like a laugh. Do you know how this looks, do you? My only son, Jack, nearly became Jacqueline because you couldn't keep your hand still. It'll be a laughing stock if people find out. I asked for a Moyle, I got a shokehead. You slaughterer, you rotten excuse for a man. Get up on your feet. No, don't say I didn't warn you. I had slipped quietly down the stairs and sat on the bottom step, trying to get a better look at what was happening. Moses Khan was not tall, maybe 5'7" or 8, and maybe 50 years old. His hair had not yet started to gray. He was built like a wine barrel, broad across the chest with short, powerful arms and legs. Moses Khan, red in the face and dressed in his double-breasted brown pinstripe suit, looked like vengeance itself as he kicked the hapless Moyle again and again in the face, the stomach, the legs. Get up, Shmulewitz, you coward. I had seen so much violence in my life that it sickened me, caused me to deny the very existence of God. One might have expected me to feel revulsion at what I saw, a man's face being kicked into a bloody pulp. But I felt no such thing. Instead, I felt a sort of justice was taking place before my eyes. When Moses Khan was finished, Shmulewitz lay barely conscious on the ground, writhing in his own blood. I'll send you a bill. Now go home and clean yourself up, you useless momser. The Moyle, Shmulewitz, stumbled past me without even looking in my direction. One of his eyes was sealed shut, his crooked nose broken. Don't forget to take your teeth, Moses Khan called after him, tossing a pair of bloodied teeth like a set of dice. I didn't know what to say, so I simply said, Mazel tov on the birth of your son. Moses Khan licked the blood from his knuckles and many ringed fingers like a jungle beast after battle. He was out of breath and he looked surprised to see me. You're the one who sang Beautiful as the Moon, to little Jack. Yes, I said, surprised he had recognized a song from my youth. You speak Yiddish? Abyssal, he said. I saw Bessie Tomaszewski sing once at the Folkspina in New York City. His face was dark, handsome, with thick black eyebrows and a sharp nose. He wore his coal black hair brushed straight back on his head. He had a cleft chin and looked like he needed a shave. That business didn't upset you, did it? Not at all, I said. He hurt your baby. You hire a professional, you expect results. He did not do his job properly, I said. Most of these stiffs here call me Moses, he said, extending a bloody hand to shake, but you can call me Mo. I am Fanny. You gave out cigars at my wedding. Moses Khan looked puzzled and then remembered, and his face became bright. Independence Day. The bride was you? Yes, I said. I'm married to Laszlo Schwartz. He is a watchmaker. Moses Khan was not familiar with Laszlo. Perhaps he only knew his face, but could not match his name. Since the war, he says Kaddish every day for the dead, the camps, Hiroshima. He feels responsible to ease the pain of their souls. You don't believe in that horse shit. I don't believe in anything. Well, that's good. He was looking at me, and there was something about his eyes that frightened me, the way they looked not at me, but into me. You're not wearing a wedding ring, he said. No, I said, I've lost 2 rings already. My fingers are very slim, and we can't afford to buy another. Moses Khan stepped closer and took my hands in his, turning them over and inspecting the palms tenderly with a battered index finger. You don't work. I'm busy at the synagogue. Then he noticed the numbers on my arm. Where? I told him where I'd been during those years, and he simply shook his head sadly. You're from Poland? I was not comfortable talking about my past, so I said, you have a beautiful boy. He'll do just fine if he survives what that butcher did. Besides that, 10 fingers, 10 toes, everything in the right place. We were both quiet for a moment. I could hear chairs being dragged across the floor above our heads. So you're not working, but you're not having a baby. I was surprised he would say such a thing, having just met me. How do you know? I said. Are you having a baby? Ever? No, I said after a long moment. The way you rocked little Jack in your arms and sang to him, I think you would have kept him for your own. Stop it, I said. I did not like to see him cry. I only tried to soothe him. Because you've seen enough children suffer. Stop it, because you couldn't stop their pain. Enough. What do you do to ease your pain? Volunteer with a bunch of yentas? You deserve more. From upstairs, a voice called out, has anyone seen Moses? I looked everywhere. Listen, he said. I think I understand what you need. This is America. Make something of yourself. Make some money for yourself. Buy yourself a ring, a handful of rings. You're not like the rest of the yentas here. He handed me a beige business card that was warm from his hand. come by my office and talk to me. I think I've got something for you to do. Thank you.
That was great. John, you still have more time if you want. If you want to say anything else, or we can move to the questions. Wait. It's on mute. Hold on. I don't know why you got muted. Okay.
Yeah, happy to explain a little bit. Yeah, it was a really interesting experience writing from a woman's perspective, from somebody from a different time. I wanted to write a lengthy period piece, so writing something in the 1940s was a real challenge. But it just came to life, and I saw Fanny grow and surprise me as I continued to write this. And so I was really when this short story got accepted for publication, my publisher said, you need another 2 or 3 stories. It's too short. And that was when I kind of went back to this dormant novel and pulled out this 80-page story and made a few very minor changes, and it just came to life. I think it's very cinematic. I'd love to see it on the screen one day. But I really these characters become real, and they're not based on anybody. They're not any version of anything else except out of my own head. So the fact of creating whole new people, to me, just amazes me when they seem so alive. So I'll leave it at that, but happy to answer any specific questions.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to add Judy and Aaron to the spotlight here. And so I guess I'll add myself. Okay. So we have a few questions in the chat. Let me scroll up for a sec. Okay. The first one is for Aaron from Avi Landis, who knows, I think, all 3 of you. Okay. First of all, I'm just reading Avi's message. First of all, it's a great, great book, Hotel Cuba. I loved every moment of it. When writing the book, how did you know where the history you wanted to share should start, and how did you figure out the beginning and an end of the story?
Thanks for that question, Avi, who is a wonderful writer, by the way. Everybody should read Meiselman, The Lean Years. So this story, I knew immediately I wanted to start with the fish and the oranges. And one of the things that my grandfather talked about in his recordings was that everybody on the boat coming across the Atlantic was incredibly seasick. And he had this iron stomach. And so he was eating everybody else's fish and oranges, which was what they were serving. I think the oranges to help combat scurvy. And of course, the fish was easy to provide. It was interesting because I had a whole bunch of material that I could have included. At one point, the story stretched all the way into the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I decided to really limit it to the years between 1922 and 1924, which are really about my grandmother's desire to come to America. And it was an interesting time because after the Russian Revolution, there was sort of this anti-communist hysteria that happened in the United States, and particularly they were afraid that Jewish communists were going to come and infiltrate the U.S. And so, just kind of like there was that Muslim ban that we had earlier, where Muslims were not specifically banned, but all the countries that a lot of Muslim refugees were coming from were banned. Same thing was happening. All these immigrants from Eastern Europe were like 85% Jewish. That area was subjected to severe quotas. And so the steamboat companies were losing money because they had been making so much money ferrying all these desperate immigrants trying to get to the United States. So they started marketing Cuba, Mexico, Argentina as alternate destinations. And there was this loophole in the law that if you could establish residency in Cuba for a year, for example, you weren't immigrating from Eastern Europe, you were immigrating from Cuba. So you weren't subject to those same quotas. So my grandmother came to Cuba with that intention. But then she got impatient and she wanted to get into the United States sooner, and she tried, and she was arrested for being an undocumented immigrant. So the story of how she was then deported back to Cuba, and then eventually how she made it into the United States, which the way it actually happened is different from the way that I had it happen in the book. But the way that I had it happen in the book was based on actual historical research. So not every event that happens in my book is my grandmother's story, but it's all based on different stories and different things that actually occurred. And one of the really fascinating things I found out was that women used to actually cross-dress to get into the United States because sailors' papers were never checked at the borders. So if you cross-dressed as a sailor, you could get in and nobody would check your passport. So anyway, that journey of how she got to America and then how she eventually would sort of decide her fate once she got to America, to me, dictated the shape of the story.
That just reminded me of how, I guess it was the norm also. My great grandfather cross-dressed as a woman to get out of the Tsar's army in Russia. So
I know we think
okay.
trans is like this whole new invention,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
No.
So new. Okay, Judy, this is a question for you from Fern. Memoirists often share family secrets, often without the approval of their family. Any advice for writers on whether and how best to do this? Great question.
Well, yeah, my suggestion is to be as open as possible with all members of the family that you're writing about. Otherwise you can get sued. It could be very nasty. Or you'll, I have a friend who wrote a memoir and a distant relative of hers was upset with her. She withdrew her book. I mean, so.
It's tough. That's tough. There's another question for you, Judy, from Batya. When did you realize that the events of the past wouldn't hurt you anymore?
Wow.
If.
Does she want the day, the hour, the I mean, it's like, that look at I remember I was at a dinner party at Paula Firestein's home in Scarsdale, who was here, Paula. And I remember this was in the 80s when me and my ex-husband, we were on Schlichut in Minneapolis. We came to New York, and I was writing about Joey then. It must have been, I don't know, 84, 85. And we were sitting around the table and I mentioned it at the table. They asked me at the table what I was doing. I said, I'm writing about this episode in my life. And then there were a few other people at the table who started telling their stories. And it was the first time that I had ever talked about it in public without crying, without tears. And I was just astounded to hear these other stories, like a family that had 3 children. This woman grew up in a family with 2 sisters, and the family photograph, there were 4. Or when someone asked the mother how many children, she said she had 4 children. I mean, there are all kinds of stories like this. So, and look at the pain, it doesn't dominate my life like it did, 40 years ago. And now it's a whole different thing because I'm talking about it and like Yanni, expert on delayed childhood grief. So I can talk about it now, but it took decades.
Okay. I have a question for all 3 of you. And that has to do with the research. I'll start with John because you had to go back and research this time period. Like how do you tell yourself to stop going down the research rabbit hole if you do? This is a problem I have. I just keep, one more detail and I could spend a whole 5 hours looking for one little detail and not find it. Or how do you balance the research with the story and the writing? And at what point do you do the research?
Well, it was pretty easy in this case because it was limited. It was really like the backstory chapters of a novel. So it wasn't going to be expansive. And it was just 80 pages and initially it was going to be less than that. I don't know, I got really lucky. There was a scene when she comes off the boat in New Bedford, and immediately Laszlo takes her to go shopping for clothing at a department store. And there was a famous department store in Waltham called Cronin's, Grover Cronin. So I went to the local library and I found all the little like weekly kind of circulars that were out from that time, and got to know like what kind of clothing people were wearing, and I don't know, just things like that. It was just really kind of fun. And then I realized that since Laszlo worked at the watch factory, well, what did he do during the war? Well, people who were watchmakers, he could have worked on the Norden bomb site, that was responsible for. So he did that. So I just kind of, one thing led to another, and it happened pretty automatically. Like the subconscious just takes you places, and it happened rather quickly, over a few months in the summer. And it was just a very fun process. But if it were a full novel, maybe I'd never stop. So, but the limited aspect of it, the limited narrative kind of made it possible that I can get in and get out and get what I needed.
Did you have to do research for the other stories in your collection?
No, a lot of them are more personal stories, or I mean, this is the most overtly Jewish story. The other ones are not really quite that Jewish. There's some very kind of something pops into my head one morning and I wrote the story, So this one is 99% of all the research came in as one story.
Aaron, what about you? You said you almost went all the way to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So how did you dial it back?
So, it was interesting when I first got the idea to write this as a novel. I thought, well, I'm not a historical novelist per se, and where do I even get started? There's so much to learn. And I went to hear a writer named Dolan Perkins Valdez, who writes wonderful historical fiction, at a reading, and she said, I write a draft of my story to figure out what I need to figure out. And that liberated me, because it first of all, it allowed me to just sort of plunge forward, reckless, making lots of mistakes, not worried about what was right or wrong. And as I was going through the story, I learned, I need to figure out, how do heaters work in cars in 1922, as opposed to everything that happened in 1922, or how do, if people are washing their hands on the boat coming across the ocean, are there faucets? Yes, there were, and they had salt water coming out of the faucets. So writing the story with that in mind really created these kind of helpful structures to contain the research process, which, as any of you who've done research know, is endlessly pleasurable, and you can go on and on and on. I mean, and it just takes you down like these rabbit holes. And you get a book, you look through the bibliography of the book, and then you want to read all the books that are in the bibliography. And then in my case, I actually went and I wrote to the people who wrote the books and asked them if I could interview them. And it's amazing how many of them very generously gave of their time. And even one person, this guy Arlo Haskell, who wrote this book called The Jews of Key West. Part of my book takes place in Key West. He also directs the Key West literary seminars, and he invited me to come and stay. They have an apartment for writers, and he introduced me to a local historian. And really, it was just, so 6 degrees of separation, best research technique out there. Just tell every single person that you are interested in topic X, and I guarantee you someone knows someone knows someone who knows someone who can help you with these questions.
Also, it's probably a lot faster to interview the authors of those books, so you can ask your pinpointed questions as opposed to reading 20, 30 books on the topic.
Totally.
Okay, Judy, what about you and your research? I know
I did some research on Cleveland around 1950, because my father was an avid newspaper reader. So I wanted to see what he was reading, and see, I read about nylon stockings, and this was years ago when I was in Cleveland for a while. I think it was called microfiche or microfilm, like that. And I enjoyed it. I could see how one could be drawn into that, but I was very focused and determined to just, I knew what kind of details I was looking for.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
I also think that our subconscious is endlessly genius. It knows everything. And it's like when you get into a project, the subconscious kind of guides you. It's like, well, I need to learn about a displaced persons camp. You suddenly know where to go to find that information. I need to learn about gangsters in the Boston area. Your mind knows where to go there. Like, if you trust in your subconscious as an artist and a writer, you will almost always get there because it knows everything.
Okay. I
That
hope
applies to
you're right.
everyone. This is not a me thing. It's a you thing too. Trust your subconscious, believe me.
Trust your subconscious. Okay. All right. There's a few more questions in the chat from June for Judy. How did you actually shift your intimate need for relieving grief to a transpersonal work of great scope?
Well, I think writing the fiction made me realize that this was it wasn't just my own story. It's the story of many families where there are family secrets, and especially in families where they don't have the language, and especially in the 50s where you didn't even talk about death with children. I mean, now there's so many resources available to families who have who experience death in the family, and it's like, how do you say, Modiin May love? It's like,
it's a given, or it's a
yeah, it's a given that the children, the siblings, are going to get attention.
Yeah.
And not only for like a month, but they can join groups for years of siblings of where there's a death in the family, be it a parent or not a sibling. In those days. So it was also a cultural thing. It wasn't just a personal thing of my parents. They behaved according to their cultural milieu. And what really helped me is I rewrote the traumatic scene for me in the kitchen when I was crying, and my mother was there, and my sister came in, and then my father came in and told us to be quiet, or told me to be quiet. I rewrote that scene. And after that, I realized, I rewrote it from the point of view of like a compassionate older woman who understood what a horrible trauma this was. And that rewrite, that enabled me to go forward.
Amazing. Amazing. I love what you said in your talk, that you wrote the story that you needed.
Yes, at each decade, I wrote the story that I needed. And also the memory changes. I mean, we could have a whole, discussion here about memory and how first the memory is frozen. And when it's frozen, you're sort of dead inside. The idea is to laloosh, to get the memory moving. And as soon as it starts moving and changing and rewriting and radical rewriting, then it's alive.
Love that.
And you can part from it. You're not stuck with it.
Okay, there's another question here for Aaron. Sounds like a wonderful novel, but with all the recordings you have of your grandparents, why did you choose the form of novel rather than fictive memoir?
Great question. Well, I don't consider this fictive memoir. I really consider it a novel. So I had a lot more information about my grandfather's story than my grandmother's. As I said, I had these 7 hours of recordings. 6.5 hours was my grandfather's story. Half an hour was my grandmother's. And I really wish like a novelist had been in the room, although I was actually 5 years old at the time, and you can hear my grandmother asking if I want a cookie in the middle of the recordings, but I wasn't aware that I was a novelist. But I wanted to know, like, you came from this small shtetl, landlocked, wintry, muddy, poor, in the middle of Russia, to Havana, Cuba. Like, what did you think of the music? What did you think of the food? Like, how did you learn to speak Spanish? All of this. And those were the kinds of details that I think you can only bring forth in fiction. So, and there just weren't that many facts that were available about the story for me to make it into a whole book. But I think what actually emerged was really, for me, a very juicy story and very satisfying as fiction. But one of the nuggets that came out through the research process that sort of fascinated me was my grandmother said about Cuba, it was a terrible place. I was glad to get out of there. I didn't want to be there. Her sister, who came with her to Cuba, when she was 80 years old, her son took her to a Cuban restaurant in Florida. And her sister, at age 80, ordered in perfect Spanish, talked to the waiter in perfect Spanish, and then turned to her son and said, Havana was the most beautiful city in the whole world. And that, contrast between the two sisters to me was, just, that's a novel, right? I mean, that's Sense and Sensibility. Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, like totally like was an inspiration point for me in this book. These two sisters, one more serious, practical, one more romantic, flight of fancy, and how they both negotiate this very difficult and unusual situation and navigate it. To me, that just lent itself to fiction.
Okay, I have a question for all three of you, which is, what are you working on now? Do you have something new project? Who wants to start? Go ahead, John.
I have switched my hand to playwriting over the last little while. I adapted one of my stories from my first book, The Ascent of Eli Israel, into a one-act play called For as Long as the Lamp is Burning. But I think I want to build it into a bigger play. And I just wrote another one, and I'm working on one now, or coming up with the ideas about a Jewish school shooter who's on life support in a hospital, and they want to donate the organs, but won't give him the honor walk that he should have as a donor. So it's very intense. It's a brand new idea for me, but I don't think I've been so excited about a project in a long time. So playwriting is fun. Maybe I could become a playwright. Writing a novel is very lonely and takes forever. Writing a play, there's a lot more collaborative aspect to it. So maybe that's a new hat I could wear.
Awesome. Very cool. Judy, what about you? Working on anything new?
Well, yeah, I'm waiting for the paperback book to come out and for things to settle down. And then I have 3 unfinished books. One is a collection of short stories called Bethlehem Road. And another one is about the bat mitzvah process that I went through with, where is my dear friend who's here, who tried to teach me how to read Torah. And so that's one book, and short stories. And then I have a book of essays on leaving, Leaving. So I could, pick up any of those. But I did this one first because I knew it would be the hardest. So after this, everything will be a piece of cake, I figure. I'm also busy putting music to some of Emily Dickinson's poems, and I really love doing that. And that's somewhat time consuming. And
Cool. Okay, Aaron, what are you working on?
So I've got another novel down the pipeline, but actually I just finished a personal essay called Queering the Fiddler on the Roof story, which tells a little bit about my grandparents telling their immigration stories, and the way Fiddler on the Roof kind of like overshadowed my childhood, couldn't get away from Fiddler on the Roof. And then the other piece that I'm trying to work up right now is actually about the cover for this book. So I find it fascinating that authors almost never have any say in their covers and never talk to their cover designers. So I actually just Googled the name of the cover designer on the back of my book, and I wrote to him and I just said, I just want to let you know, I really love the cover. And it turns out he's from Brazil, and he had never designed a cover for a major US publisher before. And this was his first one. And he was so excited and so thrilled, first of all, just to hear from me and to hear that people really love the covers of their books. So I want to write an essay about, like, why don't authors get to talk to their cover designers and work with them during the cover design process, and investigate the whole process of cover design, because now I'm fascinated.
Cool. Okay, we have another question from Wendy for all three of you. How do you market the Jewish or Israeli themed books now that we are not the flavor of the month politically? I'll just yeah, it's Jewish American Heritage Month. I'll just say, I think very easy to market to Jews because we're big readers. And someone asked me in my first book event, like, did you write this for a Jewish audience, or do you consider yourself a Jewish writer or whatever? I'm like, I didn't write it specifically for a Jewish audience, but yeah, I'm like embracing all the Jewish community and all the sisterhood book clubs and synagogue book clubs and literary festivals and all that. So, but it's also gratifying when, non-Jewish readers, can relate to your books. So that's my answer. But what do you guys think?
I can go first again. I mean, ultimately, it's the publisher's job to market it. I think the writer is the least credible person to get out there and say, read my work, unless they're given a stage on which to read it. I find with each book I write, fewer and fewer of my friends and family are interested. So it's pretty hard. It takes a long time to write a book, thousands of hours, and 100 people bought the hardcover of my last novel, which was a Jewish polyamorous love story. 100 people, it's not worth my time. So, I don't know what to say, but it's not sustainable. You can't market your own work with unless you have thousands of Twitter followers and this and that. I'm not a marketer, I'm a writer. So I don't market my work, and because when I do, it doesn't work. So that's my sunny story.
I'm looking forward to marketing my book first in Israel and meeting people, going to book clubs and Ezra groups and talking about it. It's too big for me to think about how I'm going to market it in the States. But it'll happen. I mean, I want to.
Yeah, I'm definitely no expert on marketing, but what I've learned is that publishers are not necessarily experts on marketing either. So again, I think the 6 degrees of separation rule applies. Tell every single person, when I go to my tennis class, I'm giving out the postcards, I just tell every single person that I can and think of every possible way. And I try to be as creative with the marketing side as I am with the writing side of it, and does it work? Does it not work? Geesh, John's right. It's tough to get people interested in like buying books these days. But on the other hand, I have found with my first book, I was like really active in trying to do that kind of stuff, and it kind of worked. And the second book, I said, okay, I did my job, and now let the publisher take charge. And that was that didn't work at all. And so the third one, like I was really kind of like doing guerrilla marketing, and it was the first book that I earned out my advance and I get royalty checks from. So that's just one writer's experience, but there you have it.
I will say with the previous book, I did sell my books from a push cart under the name Papernick the Book Peddler, and I walked around New York. Great. And I was hoping, I'd sold books on the Brooklyn Bridge, sold books in Central Park, 30 or 40 books over a weekend. I was really hoping the New York Times would pick it up and write about it, and then it would go from there. That did not happen, but it's exhausting. And again, it's a completely different skill set. I'm very comfortable to be alone with my words, and less so trying to tell people how awesome I am. It's painful to do so, actually. It's very hard because you're constantly acceptance, rejection, and you reach out to people to invite you for a reading, and will they write back, and do they write back, and will people show up? And I don't think I've got the emotional stamina for it anymore. I just don't.
I don't know. I feel like to be a writer is to live with rejection all the time, especially if you're a short story writer. You're sending out your stories and they're getting rejected, or essays, creative nonfiction getting rejected all the time. But I do think that the marketing is often left up to the writer, certainly for small press published authors. And Avi Landis, who's still on this call, said to me, for a small press book, like every copy you sell has your DNA on it, because you're literally handing it to people at your events or signing it. And I've found that to be true also. My publisher, when I was, he said the way to build an audience is to do a lot of events. So I tried to push that. Oh, okay. Obviously, it's Aaron, you're the one that
I
told
didn't
him
remember
that.
saying it. Okay. I probably did it.
Okay, before we wrap up, and if you have any other questions, put them in the chat, but I wanted to just say that we have the next 2 events are already scheduled. So coming up in a few weeks on June 11th, Meryl Ain, Shadows We Carry, Seth Rogoff, the Kirschenbaum lectures, and Kim Saltzman, Straddling Black and White. And then in July, Maxim Schreier, Immigrant Baggage, Daisy Alpert Florin, My Last Innocent Year, and Chaviva Nir David, who's also on this call, To Die in Secret. So tomorrow, when I send around the recording of this call, I'll also send the links on how to sign up for those. Yeah, did anyone have to put any more comment? Thanks for all the lovely comments. I'm going to save the chat because so many nice things to say. So thank you, everybody. I want to thank John and Judy and Aaron especially, and all of you for coming, especially, you know, our writing teachers who are on here, and some of maybe your students are on here. So thank you, and have a great night if you're in Israel, great day if you are not.
Thank you, Julie.
Hiding in Rhode
Thanks,
Island right now.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Oh,
Bye.
thank you. Great to see you.